All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 2022 edition of the OMARC second Tuesday Zoom presentation. Tonight, we will have a presentation by Steve Bossert, K2GOG, and he'll be doing a presentation on commercial communication trends for the radio amateur. With that, take it away, Steve.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for the warm welcome, Dave. And tonight I'll be going through commercial communications trends for the radio amateur. So a little bit about myself. I hate biography slides, but I have been an amateur radio operator since 1998. Most of my career after leaving Sprint, where I focused on building out E911 solutions for them. Been in the research advisory business since then, held all sorts of different sales, marketing, and product roles. I'm a lifelong technology hobbyist, so that being said, it makes life a little hard to try to remove church from state or hobby from work at times, but it's really fun, and hopefully one of the bigger takeaways for this presentation, if anyone has interesting occupations or other areas that they have something interesting to share, I would certainly encourage anyone to step forward and volunteer to do a presentation for OMARC. We're always trying to build out that schedule a few months out in advance. So that's a little bit about myself. And here's what we're going to be learning about tonight. So a couple names of companies you may recognize on here, ICOM and Bridgecom. We'll be talking about some stuff about that. We'll be talking about some of the trends as it relates to the major topic of this presentation and a few bits and pieces in between. But generally, this presentation was built out of a recent business trip that I had to take. It was actually the first one that I've done since COVID. So first time I've been on an airplane since 2019, which is far too long considering what my normal schedule is. But so I found myself out in Las Vegas for some events that I'll be talking about tonight. So just some kind of some terms and conditions here, because again, I'm trying to keep the separation here. Anything that I talk about in terms of products, organizations, technologies, and companies, I'm not endorsing them in any way. Any of the photos that I've taken, for the majority of them, are taken by myself, and I'm not considering this an opinion of my current employer, who's one of the largest advisory and events companies in the world, named Omdia. And then if you'd like to share this with anybody, you're more than welcome. I'll share the slides in PDF format. That'll be posted to the various OMARC media holdings, and Dave will be posting a recording of this on the OMARC YouTube channel. So if somebody misses it or wants to go back and check the replay, you can do that. So when I say an industry event, this is what I kind of am talking about. So the name of this event was called IWCE. Here's the floor layout. There's probably a couple of vendors, because this is focused on communications technology, mostly related to radio. So there's a couple of vendors here that I kind of picked out that I thought would be familiar. So Bird, if you have a watt meter, should be top of mind. Astron, if you have a power supply. If you have different speaker microphones or antennas, Prime is a company there. Pulse, Amphenol, PCTEL, all antenna and connector vendors. So those might be familiar to give an idea. There's a bunch of other companies that really are focused on commercial, L3, Harris, and Tate, and Denke, and Talglass, and Times Microwave, and Epic. So there's a lot of other vendors, but I kind of highlighted a few just to kind of give a sense of scale here in terms of the layout. Verizon and Airbus are probably two companies that most people are familiar with. Here's Bridgecom. They had a tiny little booth, and surprisingly, our pals at ICOM that most of us probably part with paychecks to, particularly one person I know who just added a ICOM 9700 to the roster. They invested a lot of money to show things off at this event. So here's a drone photo of the show floor before things opened. And generally when you go and you travel to different industry conferences, it's often looked at as a great way for like VIP end users to get educated by vendors. And so in the context of this event, when I say a VIP end user, that's like somebody who would be responsible for making purchase decisions or technical rollouts of large networks. So think of scale like New York Police Department or county level type of stuff. So that's typically who goes, or things like that. It's also a really great way for experts to meet each other and share different thoughts. So there's a lot of combined different types of folks that visit and attend and do presentations at these events on different topics. And it's something that most people won't talk about, but since I'm amongst friends here, I'll say it. It's also a great way for vendors to kind of rub it into their competitors. And so, if Icon comes out with an interesting product or another vendor, chances are who they compete with is strategically positioned on the show floor, either close or far. And so it's always kind of fun to bounce around from booth to booth saying, hey, this is what I talked with this company about. So it's fun. And a lot of these industry events happen across different segments. So that's kind of what to expect. If you wanted to learn more about this, and again, because this event is actually owned by my employer, you can go and visit that website URL at the bottom. If anyone's looking for a reason to go to Las Vegas next March, again, this is meant for commercial people. But the strange thing this year is I definitely saw a bunch of husband and wife tag teams walking around, filling up bags full of swag that companies have, like pens and thumb drives and stuff like that. So if you're looking for another reason to go to Vegas, aside from the adult activities, this might be a good way to schedule that. So this year, I did something a little bit unique in going to this event because it's mostly commercial radio and commercial radio related technologies. I hopped on my LinkedIn profile and put a post out and said, hey, if I had a DMR radio carrying around on the 446.075 frequency, let's see if we can find each other. And so I had a whole bunch of different executives and CEOs and product managers from all different companies give it likes and thumbs up and share details and pass it to friends. And so it was kind of interesting. And so myself and a few others, we coordinated a bit of a channel plan. And I walked around with this little cheapo Co-Tray DMR radio just to kind of point out to some vendors like, yeah, $2,000 Harris radio. That's great. Look what I can do with a $15 DMR handheld. And so for anyone who's not familiar with this radio, Neil W2NDG is on here. You could probably ping him, ask some questions. I have it as well, but it's a neat little radio. But getting back on track, it was fun. So we, for the most part, a few people popped on from time to time throughout the event, just doing typical radio check, can you hear me now type of stuff. But it came in handy. A few people were trying to find colleagues or stuff like that. So it proved valuable. And it was also fun to know that with a little $15 radio, I could talk to people who took their professional Tate or Harris or ICOM type of equipment and reprogrammed it. So it was cool to see that from an interoperability standpoint. So you can see the picture at right just to explain that. So that's the little radio. For the most part, it was just simplex, but I did have a hotspot run off a power bank that I stuck at a vendor's booth. And we didn't really advertise the talk group that we were on, but it was a good way for people to communicate that way. So it was the first time, and it definitely impressed some of the folks responsible for the event. Next year, we're probably going to do a reception similar to what happens at a different industry conference that I attend mostly every year called Society of Cable Telecom Engineers. And so I think the point here is, many of us who have an interest in the radio hobby, some of us actually get to play with some of this stuff for a living. And so it was fun to really find a good way to bring everything like that together. So what does Steve do at an event like this? It sounds like it's all mystical and fun, hopping on an airplane and traveling to Las Vegas. No, it's not as fun as it sounds. It was fun probably the first time, but you're really just there to do work. You're walking, you're meeting with people. You'll probably have a dinner at the end of the night with some friends or colleagues. But for the most part, you're in and out. It leaves very little free time to do anything other than work. And I'm sticking with that, and that's the official answer. Probably this trip out, just from a personal perspective, before we get into the meat here. I was tasked with organizing a dinner for 14 of my colleagues that I haven't seen in like 3 years. There's a really cool restaurant right across from the Las Vegas Convention Center called Piero's. Most of you would probably know this restaurant, but didn't know it exists. And so it was in the movie Casino. And so it was pretty cool, especially having people from overseas, from the UK, and some of our executive staff. Everyone started to wonder, this place looks awfully familiar. And so I got some extra points on that. So it was a very good meal. I would highly recommend it. There's so many good places to eat in Vegas. This is definitely one to add to your list. So anyway, let's move on here. So our one of our favorite amateur radio companies, ICOM, they had that large booth. They had a couple toys that we would know as amateurs, the ICOM 705, which I have. Bunch of you probably on here tonight have the ICOM 7300 for HF. Maybe some of you have this new VHF UHF D-Star radio that they just introduced. So they had this one table, but really that was not the goal of this event. Really for ICOM as a company, and why this is more of a commercial presentation, is they were really focused on promoting a number of other things. And you can see at bottom left a range of different terms. Some you might know, some you might not. And I'll review 3 of these tonight because I felt like this would be a little bit more specific to raise some interest within the amateur radio community. So we're going to talk about something called FirstNet. We're going to talk about ICOM's partnership with a company named Regent, who offers something called Kinetic Mesh. And then we're going to talk about PTT over cellular. So those are 3, but basically the way that they had the booth laid out, you can kind of get a sense for the photo. They had separate, little stations for the different things. So if we were talking about air or marine communications, they had a table for that. They had P25. They had their analog traditional portfolio, a digital variant called IDAS, which is digital, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But I'm going to skip over that, and we're going to just talk about those 3 tonight. And as I go through these slides, I would be fine if anyone wants to kind of throw in a question here or there. I could keep this presentation fairly manageable. So once I get to the end of the slide, if everyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, or however, I'll let Dave moderate that however he chooses to do that. So first thing to talk about is FirstNet. So the United States government funded a $7 billion network build out a few years ago. The goal of this was to offer a national broadband network strictly focused on providing a network for public safety. Many municipalities around the country have found it very hard and very expensive to try to update certain types of networks. And so the government's decided, well, maybe if they could offer something that would appeal to the public safety world, the benefit would mean municipalities do not need to host their own infrastructure like repeaters and things like that. And they could offload some of their communications needs to this network. And so from a radio perspective, you can see the spectrum there. This was freed up from when there were analog television broadcasts. So they freed up that. It was called white space. And so it's all digital. You can't take a scanner and listen to this. You're not going to hear the police on there or anything like that. It's going to be digital. But that's basically what this network is. It's a 700 megahertz national network. It's technically managed and rolled out by AT&T, but Verizon also has a very big hand, as well as a bunch of other companies. But that is a major trend. So if you've started to wonder, I know like down in Rockland County here in New York, it's a good example. Certain municipalities are starting to switch over to FirstNet. And one of the interesting things with ICOM specifically, and this was a quote that I pulled out of their press release, as you got by that last slide, they have their fingers in a bunch of different things. It's not just amateur radio and taxi cabs or things like that. There's a much bigger evolution that ICOM has. And so they're not going to drop analog. They're always going to focus on digital. So they have NextGen, they have P25, they have their IDAS portfolio. They don't really focus on doing DMR, even though that's pretty popular within amateur radio. But they're not going to drop that. But really for ICOM is the future. They're going to look at 5G, much like we see for cellular networks, same type of thing, LTE, and then FirstNet. And so when you blend all those together, it makes for some interesting portfolio decisions for a company like ICOM. And for some of the gossip, again, this probably won't appeal to the majority of us, but if you're a volunteer firefighter, this might be interesting to know. Later part of this year, they will introduce to market a VHF or UHF, so monoband radio for analog or with P25, and then also will include FirstNet. So that's a big game changer. The holdup for companies like them is when you need to certify a device on a network like AT&T, basically you go through a lot of annoying things. So that's been in the works for a while, but expect that probably in Q3. So again, if you're a firefighter, if you're not looking to support certain vendors, I won't mention who, but everyone knows the big M in the room. ICOM is coming at this pretty hard. So that's what I say about FirstNet. If anyone has any questions, again, you could just drop them into chat, or I'll just continue onward here. All right, so moving on, we'll talk about something called kinetic mesh. If anyone's heard the term mesh networks before, it's a term that gets thrown around in different ways. There's all sorts of really cool commercial applications for things like mesh networks. So there's this one company, you can see the URL at the bottom, Regent. They got highly well known for providing mesh networks for use in mining. And so communicating in mine shafts is actually quite a big challenge. Last year, Stephen KJ5HY from the USMA club at West Point gave a presentation that talked about mesh, and they were utilizing that for some of their testing and training. And so this company Regent is pretty well known for having these interesting mesh capable devices. And one of the cool things is it's frequency agnostic, which means it's just a technology. So you can put that over whatever spectrum that you are permitted to use it for. And the benefit with the way that this company structures it is you can roam seamlessly from different types of technologies. And so they can integrate in Wi-Fi, so the 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz spectrum that we're familiar with. It would also work over LTE, so all the different cellular bands. And if you were operating something on a private network, maybe on the ISM 400 or 900 bands, it's just a matter of them working with the right partners to make that happen. And so this is actually a big step for a company like ICOM to actually partner with other vendors like a Regent. And Regent has built their business around working with partners. And so this is going to be really interesting. I think the takeaway for us from an amateur radio perspective is if anyone's played around or heard about mesh networking, there's a term called AREDN, which is the de facto platform where you could buy all sorts of different equipment, put their firmware on it, and you can turn like your old router into a mesh capable device. And so we are limited to some equipment based off of frequencies, but there's ways that you could hook different devices together and connect different frequencies to different other frequencies and have the benefits of both. So for example, if you wanted to have high bandwidth on 5.8 gigahertz, but you know that's only going to cover a short range, whereas then you have 2.4 and 900 megahertz that covers a longer range. There's ways that you can build things together. But from ICOM's perspective, and this is kind of the well-informed gossip here, this partnership is going to go beyond what you would see within the commercial world. And so for us, last year, there was a kind of cryptic post that ICOM made around offering products that are going to allow us to have some fun in the millimeter wave bands. And so that's basically things above 5.8 gigahertz. And we have a lot of spectrum that goes unused. And so I think there's going to be some interesting things that we're going to see as amateurs. And so, start learning about mesh, or even keeping an eye on some of the commercial stuff that ICOM has, because that means that eventually, once they get commercial people to pay a lot more money for it, the costs come down, and then us amateurs have some new toys to play with. So that's the situation with mesh from an ICOM perspective. And now we'll move into the last topic about ICOM, is a term called POC. POC stands for push to talk over cellular. And this is very different than FirstNet, just to make sure that that's clear. So while there's that FirstNet National Public Safety Network, that's only for public safety type of people. But what happens if you still own some type of a business and you need a radio, but you don't want to have to get sucked in to have to pay for building out a repeater system or other infrastructure to support your communications? Like maybe if you work for like a construction company or an oil delivery company, that becomes a little expensive to maintain. And so moving over to PTT over cellular, you can buy radios that essentially just work like a cell phone. They connect over the network, but it offers you that same push to talk like we have with our handheld radios. And so instead of going point to point or through a repeater, it just connects over the cellular network. If anyone remembers Nexten or Nextel, those would be some similar comparisons to make, but there's some cool things that you can do within PTT over cellular. So in the case with this ICOM radio that I have pictured it right, and many other vendors offer something similar, imagine if you were talking on a repeater and you're just talking with your friends and somebody else wants to drop in, then you'd have that annoying thing called doubling on the repeater. The way that PTT over cellular could work, it's configurable. So you could actually have a full duplex conversation. So that means you can talk and listen at the same time. So there's ways that you can take PTT over cellular and integrate it into a cellular network. So let's say if you're like a taxi cab driver and you don't have a cell phone, you could actually make a phone call through your radio, which is kind of cool. And then also somebody could also break into a call. So you can do, one person to one person, you can do one person to many people. So PTT over cellular, I think, is something that we as amateurs might want to keep a close eye on. And I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide. But again, PTT over cellular is really designed for non-mission critical people, right? If you're a firefighter, a police officer, you need to know when you hit PTT, it goes and it connects and you can get your information back to where you need it. And that's why they have FirstNet. PTT over cellular is less than mission critical. So like, again, if you're like a taxi cab or a contractor or a job site, or maybe at like an entertainment venue, like here in the Hudson Valley, we have a couple nice spots to catch a concert. Those would be prime opportunities to use something that's built on PTT over cellular. And then there's also, as we'll see, there's a number of radios out there that, much like what I mentioned from ICOM with FirstNet, you can currently buy a POC radio that only works as POC, so it is dependent on the network. There's other POC radios that will allow you to do a combination of VHF or UHF. You could typically buy these for around $100 or so. And so you'd have a good analog or analog and DMR radio. And then you'd also have the added benefit of POC. And so you would pay a monthly fee for that. You pop a SIM card into it. And those are, maybe $5, $6 a month, or depending on how you negotiate that with your service provider. But, if you're a family and you don't necessarily want to use GMRS as an unlicensed but paid for service, or a family radio because you're limited to range, having something like POC is a good option. And there's a lot of things that compete with this. If anyone's ever heard of something called Zello, it's like an application you can load onto your phone. That would technically be a POC overlay. For us as amateurs, there is a really cool device. It's a little expensive, I think. but a New York-based company, R-Finder. We probably know them for the R-Finder website, which competes with Repeater Book. They have a really cool radio. It's like a smartphone with a radio built into it, DMR. And the benefit with the R-Finder device, the B1, I think is their latest model, is you don't have to worry about code plugs. It just looks it up and you could connect to whatever DMR repeater is near you. But if you want to avoid repeaters altogether, you can just connect right over networks like Brandmeister. So R-Finder is probably the closest thing that we would have to POC. And I believe they do support different types of POC functionality. But again, this I think is worth us keeping an eye on. And in a way, especially for those that are already involved in doing things like DMR, even though it's not PTT over cellular, it's awfully close. And so again, just kind of opening up the horizons here on another technology. And for vendors like an ICOM, Motorola, Yaesu, many others, it's a great way for them to have a product that they know will have a market. So that's a big trend. So if you're starting to notice less and less traffic on your analog scanner, it might be because a lot of local businesses are moving to POC. They have not even bothered with going to DMR or P25 or Nexen or anything like that. They may just move right over to POC. So hopefully that makes a little sense. I think from this event, what was pretty cool, most people, if they're into CBs and stuff, would know the company Uniden. Uniden has a subsidiary called Sayata, and they've had this radio on the market under beta test for a while. You can see that picture at right. It's a pretty cool form factor. The top of it has like a little LCD display and a knob, and it has PTTs and stuff like that. Pretty neat little device. You can learn a little bit more if you wanted to go to their website, but that's pretty much the situation with POC. And then this is probably the most wordiest slide, and I didn't really want to spend too much given the audience here. So broadband, that's a big trend within critical communications. It's not, if you're a police officer or firefighter, you're not these days reliant upon just voice communication. You have body-worn cameras, you have other video streaming devices where you could communicate back to your command. There's a lot of other applications out there within the commercial world that are well beyond the capability of a simple voice-only radio. And so many of those devices and use cases do need different networks and different spectrum. And so broadband is a very, very large and growing part of what we would deem as critical communications. What I would say the big takeaway here is some of us might be like really into just, 80 meters or HF contesting and think, well, who cares? This is not going to matter to us. But I would say it actually does. Even if you're only into HF, as more and more devices move to broadband, that means that there's going to be more devices out there that could potentially be sources of RFI. So if you do notice that your favorite band at certain times of the day becomes noisy, look around. If there's some other antennas and stuff that have popped up in your neighborhood, that might be something worth taking a look at, and know that it's something that might be critical for the first responders out there. So I would say it's probably important to stay abreast of the news locally to see what your local municipalities are doing, but also it goes beyond that. Within the amateur world, we have so much spectrum, most of it goes unutilized. If we can't figure out a way to use it, commercial vendors will. And so I would highly encourage anyone, if they're not already doing this, go to the ARRL website if you're a member and look for their Spectrum Defense Fund. If you kick them a couple extra dollars, it makes sure that we're not going to lose any of our spectrum that we have, either in the high bands or low bands. So that's all I'm going to kind of share about broadband trends. It's too wide of a topic, but just I thought that would just be a good way to kind of frame that. So this is probably one of my favorite slides. We're going to talk about drones and robots. I'm going to use this as a good opportunity to play a 45-second video, and then I'll take a drink of water, and then I'll explain a little bit about what we're going to share here, but you can get a glimpse of that by the text on the bottom. All right, so that was hopefully that music wasn't too annoying for everybody. But we're going to talk about some drones and as well as some robots and how is that relevant to amateur radio. So first we'll talk about the Spot robot. Some of you may have seen this. I think it came out 2016 and they've continued to evolve. This is made by Boston Dynamics, a very well-known robotics company. The Spot robot, you can see it here, sleeping on the corner of the booth at the IWCE event with an upgraded robotic arm compared to the black version that was on the little video there. The cool thing with this is the robot itself is kind of a platform. The front of it has cameras in it, and there's all sorts of inbuilt communications. But the real selling point of this is that there's different accessories for it. You can call them a backpack. And so like we saw in that demo video, you'd have like a Scout version, and then you'd have like the upgraded version with an arm. So you could retrofit all these different backpacks, such as like sensor suites and other kind of communications devices, thermal imaging devices, all sorts of neat things that could attach onto this and run independent from the actual robot itself. And so this might be something to think about. Again, we have a lot of spectrum. It doesn't awfully get used. There's a lot of other parallel hobbies like remote control airplanes, like OMARC. We do a special event every year at the Old Rhinebeck Aerodrome. And most of those aircraft are using 5.8 and I think 3.5 gigahertz spectrum that's license free. But we as amateurs, we have all this extra spectrum. This shows another idea. If you want to get involved in robotics and you don't want to have to rely upon license free spectrum, chances are you have an amateur allocation in the higher frequency bands where you can play around with things on. So from a robotics standpoint, that could be a great way to encourage other people to get interested in amateur radio. I'm not saying that you're going to control a robot on the 60 meter band and 5 megahertz. This is meant for, UHF and above. But there's all sorts of ways that I think we could probably think about how you could integrate in robotics and amateur radio, again, for non-voice, doing things like digital television and Internet of Things type of applications. So that's kind of the takeaway here. The next slide, this goes into that drone, and this I think is probably going to excite people. Maybe we'll get some questions on this a little bit later. So that mesh networking company, Regent, that I mentioned earlier, with their partnerships, they've started to work very closely with a number of different drone manufacturers. And what we saw in that video, just to explain that, that box essentially has a thin, highly robust power cord that's like 1,000 foot long. It retracts and rewinds into that box. And the idea is when the drone takes off, it's tethered to that. So it could actually stay aloft for, they say 24 hours. Technically, you could say it's infinite. But imagine if you needed to put up a repeater, and we all know that height is important. So what if you could put a repeater in the sky that has infinite power and you can go up 1,000 feet? You can hang all sorts of payloads off of that. You could have, in our case, like a miniaturized repeater. And we can see this like when we do high altitude balloon launches, the range of communications is pretty great. And so for like first responders, this has been taking off where they need communications in a certain area. They will deploy a drone and that'll give them like, field communications for, body worn cameras and other kind of broadband applications. And so that's probably the takeaway here. I think when most of us think about drones and amateur radio, we think about how could we get a drone to hang a wire up in a tree to hoist up a HF antenna? And certainly, I think that's probably an easy use case, but there's all sorts of other ways that we can use this. So again, thinking of ways where we could incorporate drones and robotics into amateur radio that could help us make better use of our spectrum. I think that's probably one of the bigger goals here. And you could even start to talk about mesh networking too. Great ways to provide really robust and really high reliability networks. So again, finding ways to make use of our spectrum, I think, is kind of the the big takeaway here for this from a robotics standpoint. And as you've noticed, hopefully on the top, when I say not yet on eBay, you never know what's going to land on eBay. So you might want to broaden some of your horizons for some commercial stuff. I'm not saying that this stuff is going to end up on eBay, but it might prompt you to kind of get a little adventuresome in looking for some things. And so the next thing that I highlighted, and I was asked by this particular vendor to not really advertise their name, but I just thought it was cool. Some of you may have seen an article that I had published in the 2600 Hacker magazine that talked about L-band satellite monitoring. This patch antenna kind of looked like that, but on steroids. And we probably all love like olive drab green radio equipment because it just looks cool. So this is a drone jammer. So say, for example, in the commercial world, airports have a big problem around the world where people fly drones at the end of the runway and it creates all sorts of havoc with air traffic control. Well, typically airports and high risk environments, even some commercial venues like in Las Vegas, a number of the casinos actually have dedicated drone jamming and drone detection systems. So this is like a highly directive jamming system, but it could also be used as a sensor. And so they can detect various signals and various assets. And so I just thought this was cool and thought I'd share it here. But again, if you're looking for ways to maybe use 400, 900, 2.4, 2.3, 5.8, any of these other spectrum bands that we have, and you want to play around with something like Internet of Things, here's kind of a neat way that you can think about it. For example, one of the things that I've done with mesh networking here at my house is I can look at the signal meters and watch the signal to noise ratio dip. And I've noticed predictive trends, like when my cat or members of my family walk around, I can see how the network is influenced by the signal. And there's a lot of commercial products out there that actually take that, when you can detect movement inside your house. Even maybe some of you have some alarm systems, rather than using infrared or ultrasonic detection. Some of them will actually just detect the disturbances in your home Wi-Fi and know that there's an intruder there. So again, just kind of thinking a little outside the box from a commercial standpoint, maybe give you some ideas of things that you might be able to repurpose or reuse or find other ways to use spectrum. This one I thought was really cool. Some of us play around with DMR. I haven't seen it, but there's this company named TPL. They make a low band DMR radio. So it's targeted at commercial utilities. So like here in the Hudson Valley, we have Central Hudson as one of the utilities. How do they communicate? Most of them are still using low band because of our pesky mountains. And so if anyone's ever wondered, if you wanted to get on 6 meters on DMR, there might be a way. I'm not saying that you can modify this, but keep an eye out. You never know what's going to pop up on eBay. And I'm not saying that about this particular company. I think it fills a really good niche. But as you can see, it's configured for the 2 VHF low bands. The 30 to 50 is more of a North American band, and in Europe they use 68 to 88 megahertz, similar. So that's like their 4 meter band. Then we have 6 meters here in the US, and then of course the VHF side. So might be something worth keeping an eye on, or if you go to a ham fest, maybe something like this might turn up one day. So again, just kind of keep an eye on it. There's lots of cool things that are on the commercial world that can possibly be repurposed for amateur use. We're getting kind of close to the end here. So this slide here talks about a company, again, good to save in your eBay searches. If you've ever wanted one of those military SATCOM antennas, or some of the other cool OD green or OD tan type of stuff out there, here's a company, Haskell and Denke. They make all sorts of really cool things in terms of antennas. You can see some examples there. They have a discone, multi-phase discone, broadband, log periodics, sleeve dipoles, everything. These are just all the expensive antennas that we all will never buy new, but we will certainly find at a ham fest or even on eBay. So If this company is not familiar to you, again, I'd say you never know. So all sorts of weird things turn up on eBay, maybe even Facebook Marketplace. So again, just kind of opening the horizons on some things that we might see out there in the commercial world that we could maybe repurpose. And so here's another shot of the portfolio of this company, Haskell and Dentgay. They make these flexible whip antennas. You might have seen these in military man packs over the years. There's a bunch of foreign companies that make extremely low cost, cheaply made flexible antennas like this. Like I bought one that's a flexible antenna for 27 megahertz. I figured it would probably work good for 28 for 10 meters. It's like 5 foot long. It's kind of weird. But here we could see a couple of those different variants on different commercial antennas. You can see it left a couple commercial ICOM radios. You could see another ICOM one in the back over there. I think that's one of their IDAS radios. And then the cool one with the yellow sticker around it, that's a Harris radio. So super expensive radio. Most of us would never have that, but you know, they really focus on selling their antennas to commercial users. So if you do ever come across this company at a Hamfest as an example, I would say buy it, but just be aware. And you can find this on their product sheets on their website. Many of these have a special matching network in the base of these antennas for them to work in optimal spectrum. Some of these may only work from like say 160 to 162 megahertz. There's a contract they have with the Coast Guard for some of these antennas. And then there's other ones that are broader bands. So we always have to be careful when we buy antennas that are unknown, you know, in a bin at a Hamfest. But I would say definitely keep an eye. Super high quality, super expensive, really well made stuff. The other thing probably worth mentioning is they don't always use the connectors that we like. The TNC connector, which might not be familiar to many of you, is actually fairly common on some commercial equipment. So again, you might need some kind of random adapter to go from like a TNC to SMA or BNC or something like that. So that's what I'd say about portable antennas to keep an eye out for. And then here we have, this is actually an accessories company named Piker. It's a German company. They make all sorts of things. You can see in this Go box at the left, I bet probably some of you have a speaker that looks exactly like that maybe says Kenwood on it. Well, that speaker was actually made by Piker, and they license their designs out to all sorts of companies. And so here we have an example, super expensive, another communications company called Codan. Here's their VHF, super expensive, super cool radio. They've outfitted it in this Go Kit box. And you could probably get if you zoom in there or look carefully on your screen. The funny thing with the commercial world is sometimes they integrate things that we might even have. And so there's like a little voltmeter and a USB power port and some things there on that bottom part of the left-hand side. You know, those are all things. And so maybe an idea here is if you're looking to build some kind of a Go Kit, this is the tried, true, and tested version of how they do it in the commercial world. And the funny thing with this is at a different event that I was at, and I knew I saw this somewhere, and then I went back and I found my photos. This photo was taken in 2018 at a different event, and you notice it looks the same. The only major difference with that variant compared to this one is it had a integrated GPS. So again, these things pop up all over the place. There's many different commercial users that are using these type of kits. Even companies like Verizon do have national preparedness and other communications vehicles or equipment that they buy just for them to communicate while they're trying to fix our networks that we depend upon. And so here was that one of their demo trucks where they have like all these pneumatic antennas and radios and stuff like that. So it's always cool to see how things evolve, and a lot of communications tech, it doesn't change, you know, year by year, as evidenced with this. So from 2018 to today, you know, that Codan radio that I showed on the other two slides, similar, you know, they've probably upgraded the firmware and brought out new features. But if you're looking for some ideas for Go kits, you could definitely do a search for that, or you could check this on the replay or look at the slides. And if you're looking to make something, I'm sure they've invested a lot more than we would and figured out the optimal placement. So that's the takeaway on there. Here's another shot. This is another radio made by Codan. It's a tactical VHF low band targeted toward the military. Sometimes these could be used on the 6 meter and 4 meter band, 2 meters, R220 band here in the United States. So there's all sorts of variants, but if you have a radio like a G90 or an FT817, you can see kind of like, it's like the same heritage. Our radios are black, theirs are green, but this is a cool radio. Again, this stuff does turn up on eBay. So plug in Codan, you might find a new toy. There's all sorts of different groups within the amateur radio world, like HF Pack. And then some of you might be familiar with Summits on the Air or Parks on the Air. Finding a man pack radio is kind of fun to use for those type of amateur radio activities. And so fun thing here is the upcoming special event. I'm sure there's somebody who was just waiting to see if I was going to weave that in here. The answer was yes. So local here to the Hudson Valley is the Hudson River Radio Relay event taking place on June 11th. One of the frequencies that has been adopted by amateurs is 51.00 megahertz in FM mode. That was considered a standard crystal frequency for old military radios. And it's a good spot to listen. You never know who you're going to find. And so we'll give a try to using 51.00 megahertz FM mode during that event this year. And you can find the other frequencies that we'll use on the website listed below. We'll also have USMA at West Point operating from Constitution Island this year. So they're going to be using a combination of civilian and military gear. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So again, you never know what you're going to find. Broaden your horizons on eBay and Facebook Marketplace. Stuff like this does pop up from time to time. So that's worth mentioning. And then a fun thing here, I'm not going to say it out loud. There's an antenna style that is in use by commercial. It resembles an appendage that you would consider part of a donkey. I won't say what, but that's the ubiquitous term. And now it's almost like used as a de facto marketing thing. So if you did a search for that word, I'll let you use your imagination of what special characters to change in that second word. If you did a search for donkey blank antenna on eBay, I almost think that you're probably going to come across something that you won't get in trouble for. So again, just broadening the horizons there for what to search for from the commercial world. Now we get, I think, two more slides to the end here. So Bridgecom, most of us have bought an Anytone radio from them to play with DMR or maybe a hotspot. Had a chat with the founder of Bridgecom, Ron, as well as a few other folks there. So all the folks in the video that we watch on the Bridgecom website, I got to meet them in person. And I took all these photos before the show floor officially opened, which is why there's no people in there, because people don't always want their photos out there. But some of the takeaways for Bridgecom, they're more than amateur. They started as amateur, but they do actually a fair amount of commercial work. So they have a new product that they unveiled at the event called the Skybridge Pro, which is kind of like our hotspots that we use, but it's targeted towards commercial users. And the idea is you take multiple hotspots, you connect them over your local network, let's say like on a large college campus or a large manufacturing facility. You could use multiple hotspots to cover a particular area, and then you can use your DMR radio or whatever to communicate back and forth, as well as for local site as well as off-site communications. And so they were pretty stoked about that to bring that out to market. And then I kind of went down into the weeds because a few of us recognized each other. There was a rumor, I'll just say, that one of their product managers was asking me about if I would be interested in buying a tri-band radio. And sounds like they're going to come out with something. I'm not going to give out any further details, but it sounds like they're trying to figure out the right partner to bring out a tri-band 2 meter 220 and 430 radio. So you might see some new stuff popping up there. I talked with them about some of their manufacturing. Some of us may know about supply chain disruptions in semiconductors. I've had an eye on their 220 repeater for a while. They took it off of market mainly because of components being harder to source over the past few years, but that's slowly starting to resolve. So if you or your clubs that you're members of are looking for a repeater that's DMR and analog, they have a full line of repeaters, and they've had that for a long time, but there'll be a lesser wait time coming soon, but especially on the 220 side, that was what I was asking about. And then funny enough, in the conversation, they recently had an order placed by those that are involved in the M17 project, which is an open source digital codec developed by amateur radio for amateur radio. And so it sounds like in the New Hampshire area, there might be some of the first M17 repeaters. So it's going to use the Bridgecom platform, and then running with like an MMDVM modem on it. So you might start hearing a little bit more about that, but lots of cool things, really cool experience to meet some of them. I've met a few of them at a couple hamfests over the years, but in a commercial setting, I think this was kind of a unique place for them. And then finally, from this little short 3-day trip, the biggest regret that I had, this is kind of funny. I was sitting in my hotel room the night before I was flying back. I went on Facebook Marketplace, typed in, I think, ham radio, and I came across this Yaesu FT70G. I bet nobody on here has ever heard of this, but for a time in the early 80s, Yaesu did have a HF man pack, and to change the frequencies, it's super annoying. You'd have to hit these buttons, and it was all manually encoded to change frequency. So no VFO knob, because again, this was directed towards commercial users. I've been really looking for one of these for years, just because I thought it was really cool. It's like 13 pounds. It's not a small radio, but it's built like a tank, and it's really neat. So I find one of these in Las Vegas. You know, it would have been probably about a 35-40 minute Uber drive for me. And I communicated with this lady, part of somebody in her family. She was looking for like $250 on it, but I couldn't coordinate her schedule against mine, and I wasn't going to reroute a flight and miss getting home on time. So couldn't make that work. I think she probably has sold it, but I could be wrong. If you do a search on Facebook, and if you're looking for something like this, I think she had a bunch of other stuff too. So you could change your location to Vegas and do a search for ham radio stuff or whatever, and you might come across this. So.
All right, Steve, thank you very much for doing the presentation tonight. It was very cool. And we will look forward to seeing what else comes out of it in the future. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. And just a reminder, this presentation will go up on the OMARC YouTube channel probably in the next day. So if you want to go back and look at it, you are more than able to do that. All right, thanks again, Steve.